You spent all week researching the parts you needed for your project, finding out where to order them, getting the orders placed, and collecting all the parts in anticipation of the weekend. The weekend finally arrives, and you're ready to get out in the shop and work on your project. You take all your shiny new parts, all of your ambition and energy that you've stored up for the week, you head out to the garage, and one thing after another goes wrong. It's happened to all of us, and this past weekend it happened to my dad and I. I was really excited to bring you another video featuring our 1972 International 1110. My dad has taken to calling that truck Sweet Pea, and so I think we're stuck with the name Sweet Pea. So we set out to get Sweet Pea roadworthy and reliable for the first time in a long time. I had ordered all kinds of parts, brake parts, new carburetor, all kinds of stuff to help get that truck up on the road, and right from the jump, everything went south. And I know you guys can relate to this, so I want to talk about it a little bit. So I'm here today to talk about when projects go sideways. Our project went sideways this weekend, and I'm not super thrilled about that. It's actually very demotivating when that happens, and I want to talk about how to get through it, what we encountered, and how do you keep pushing yourself forward to keep making progress on your project even when it pisses you off and you don't want to look at it for a month. To get things started, this truck has drum brakes on all four corners. If you've worked on drum brakes, you know where this is headed. We had about 8 hours to get all four corners of the drum brakes done, get a carb swap done, and get the shifter fixed. And we're going to talk about that because the video of that truck running away went a little viral on me, and I want to address a few comments with regards to that clip. But anyone who's worked on drum brakes knows things can go sideways pretty quickly, and that's exactly what happened to us. The truck, for the most part, was pretty well taken care of throughout its life. Despite all the rust, a lot of maintenance had been done on this truck. It was the farmer's daily driver right up until he passed away about a dozen years ago, and it's been sitting ever since. I had some hope that the brakes wouldn't put up as much of a fight as they did. That really was misplaced hope. Right away, we jumped right into the driver's side front drum, and it took us three and a half hours just to get the drum off the truck. We ended up having to use a torch and a rosebud tip to heat up that drum glowing red, douse it in penetrating oil to get it to separate from the hub assembly. It was a nightmare, and it fought us every step of the way. Once we really started to dig into it, we could tell it wasn't the first fight that this drum had put up. There were chips and chunks missing out of the back of that drum, and obviously, you know, that thing has been pretty much rendered useless. And we got about halfway through trying to get it off, and I was so frustrated, I was about ready to torch cut the darn thing off. And I said, hold up, before we do anything too crazy, let me look and see if we can even obtain these drums, because we're talking about a mid-70s international pickup truck. A lot of these parts aren't interchangeable with anything that's available today, and certainly drum brakes on the front of vehicles is completely obsolete. It's a thing of the past. So in my research, I found that one, the drums are very hard to obtain. They're out of stock most places, and two, they run about $250 each. That is an insane amount for drums, but it's not a unique problem to the international pickup line. The 3/4 ton brake drums that we took off that orange truck, they're basically unobtainable. The only sets we could find were $500 for each drum. You're talking $1,000 to replace two drums. This truck was $500 to replace two drums. We're not going to do that, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but that's how we started our day. Drum impossible to get off, insanely expensive, and frustration just ensued from there. So I bought all of the brake shoes and hardware for the front and back of the truck from Rock Auto. Rock Auto has been fairly reliable for me as far as sourcing parts, having parts that fit. The nice part about Rock Auto is they do provide pictures of all the parts, so you can kind of cross-reference images to what the parts are in real life. And obviously, that can be super handy when there are, you know, things that are noticeably different between the parts. So we took our time. We ordered the brake shoes. We had trouble sourcing front brake hardware, but we figured between the kits that we had, the things we were able to source, we'd have enough parts to make it work. Now, the shoes are the appropriate size and shape, but there are slight nuance differences in how those shoes were manufactured. The backing plates were slightly thicker, which then didn't allow the acceptance of the adjuster hardware, the star drive. So we had to do a little bit of grinding there. The brake all of the spring retainer springs were completely different. So we had to use some of the old hardware, mix and match. One of the really frustrating things was the original brake drums have a hole drilled in them that accepts some self-tapping hardware that holds a little bracket that holds a couple rods, and that hardware cams back and forth, and what it does is it holds the adjustment retainer in place. So that little piece of steel keeps that star drive from rotating backwards and loosening up the brake drums. That hole was not drilled in the appropriate location, nor was it the right size for the original hardware. So now we've got to go about drilling out a new hole, modifying everything, and we didn't find that until we were about 6 hours deep on the front brake job. So we kind of threw our hands up at that point, and it was like we were taking hit after hit after hit, and that's only just getting started with all the issues we had. So I know you guys run into these things, and I know that aftermarket parts can be extremely difficult to work with, and you may not have options other than the aftermarket to support these really old vehicles. And these are just the reality of things you're going to run into, and it's kind of why I wanted to talk about it today. I know you guys feel frustration. I felt incredibly frustrated on that day, but the last thing I want to see is projects like this get put on the shelf and never touched again. That's not what this channel is about. As I say every week, you know, we're getting out in the garage, we're working on our projects, and they're getting them finished. So, you know, I had to kind of get out of my little pity party for myself and get past that and film that. I wanted to film this and talk about that rather than just not show you guys the footage. We ordered a new carburetor for this truck. We could have sourced a used one. That carburetor is whipped, guys. It's got a broken choke linkage. The adjustment through the retaining spring that holds the choke in place for adjustment was broken into a bunch of pieces. The cam that moves the accelerator pump up and down, the linkage for the accelerator pump up and down, completely worn out. The butterfly linkage is worn out. Like, the thing is just whipped. It's done. It's tired. It needed to be replaced. On a budget, you could go find any Holley 2-barrel on Facebook Marketplace, anywhere else. Pick one of those up dirt cheap. Dad decided he didn't want, because the truck lives on his property, he didn't want the issues with old carburetors and all these other things. So he just made the decision. He was flat out going to order a brand new Holley 2-barrel. And I was happy with that. I've tuned on Holley 2-barrels forever in my derby days. That's all I used. So carb I know well, really easy to work on. Should have been a direct replacement swap. Boy, was I mistaken there. While the old carburetor was a factory Holley 2-barrel, the updated versions in the body and other things created a whole number of problems. Number one, the factory Holley carb uses 4 bolts to hold it into the manifold. The way that those newer Holley 2-barrels are designed, you cannot fit a bolt into the passenger side rear hole closest to the firewall. The bolt's too long. The head hits on the body of the carburetor, and it comes in at an angle, and you can't get it in there. Oh, son of a bitch. This thing needs a freaking stud. Super frustrating. We didn't have a stud kit with us. I ended up modifying the original bolt and getting it put in. No problem. Finally get it bolted down, and I go to hit the linkage, the throttle linkage, to make sure there's no binding, and I can't get any pump shot at all out of the accelerator pump. And I start to look a little closer, and where the original carburetor body, the accelerator pump arm sits just under flush. I mean, it's just above the base of the carburetor. So there's some clearance in there. Whereas the new style, it sits just below the base of the carburetor, and you're counting on a little notch in your manifold there where that accelerator pump's going to fall. Well, that old school manifold is completely flat on top. So now we need a carb spacer, which we don't have, so we can't install the carburetor. And then to make matters even worse, the carburetor doesn't come with a fuel inlet, and it requires a 3/8 hardline with a flare on it. It's got an inverted flare fitting on it. So you need a 3/8 fuel line, which was not what was on the truck. So boom, boom, boom. Stud kit, carb spacer, and a new fuel inlet hardware. Didn't have any of those things. So what we came to do, put brakes on the truck, put a carburetor on the truck, and get it running and driving reliably, we couldn't do. And those things all happened one right after the other, just taking kicks in the teeth over and over again. In addition to that, my dad's got a ton of hardware around his shop. He had studs that we could have used in the manifold that matched the thread pitch, but the threads on the studs were, one side was fine thread and one side was a standard SAE. And the problem with that is we didn't have the fine thread nuts. So we spent an hour looking for fine thread nuts through all of his hardware. I couldn't find those. It was just one thing after the other. Like, we're so close to having parts, but we didn't have the parts. Very, very frustrating. The one good thing that happened, and it's time we kind of address the elephant in the room. We were able to finally figure out the shift linkage issue. So about 2 weeks ago, I posted up the YouTube short of Sweet Pea doing the runaway. I had the remote starter hooked up to the truck. We had just finished a carburetor rebuild, put it back on the truck, and the carburetor was adjusted idles way too high. When I started the truck, it was in park. And one of the frustrating things is, I think there's a lot of assumptions of the truck's manual. I left it in reverse. It's an automatic transmission. When have you ever left an automatic transmission in gear? I mean, honestly, like that one just kind of blew me away, even though I left the pin post saying it's an automatic transmission. There's people insistent that I left it in gear. Okay, well, it was in park. There's video in that long form video where you can see that right before that happened, Dad and I were standing outside the truck with the truck in park and running, and it didn't move. So it was a situation where we made mistakes, and I don't want this to come off as I'm saying it was an accident and there was no one to blame. We certainly could have avoided that situation altogether. But I think that's important why we talk about that, because I want to make sure the right lessons get learned. One, obviously, if you're working on a manual vehicle, make sure it's not in gear when you're working on it. That should be fairly obvious. But two, this is not a manual vehicle. It's an automatic. And it does have a neutral safety switch. I threw that information out there. Yes, we had a remote starter on it. Yes, you can start a vehicle in gear with a remote starter. I fully acknowledge that. The truck, when using the key, will not start in gear. It will not start in gear. And after the fact, when we were messing around with the truck, that was one of the things we noticed is we had the key working at one point, and we were trying to do some other things with the truck. In park, the truck would start all the time off the key. It would fire every time off the key. But the problem was it would then, in park detent, not every single time, but occasionally, it would get to a point where at the very bottom of the park detent, so we've not pulled the lever back to knock it out of gear, at the very bottom of the park detent, it would find reverse. So we knew at that point, after we messed with it, that the issue was the shift linkage. Our mistake was taking a vehicle unknown to us, who knows what's been done to it in the past, and trusting it without any safeguards. What we really should have done in that situation, we should have had the truck jacked up. We should have the tires off the ground. And that's how we've been working on the truck since that moment. And that's a lesson that I think I will definitely take forward into the future when we're working on some of these old vehicles, is if you don't know the condition of the vehicle, you should really safeguard yourself by either chalking the wheels or putting the truck up on blocks. What I will say is it's an automatic transmission, so it probably wouldn't have gone over chocks, but if I was using a 2x4 or 4x4, it was running pretty strong in that moment. Odds are it probably would have just rolled right over those blocks. It would have bought me some time, but it wouldn't have stopped the situation from happening. A manual truck with a granny gear or granny reverse, wouldn't have mattered. Chocks aren't going to matter. It's going to go right over them. So the safest thing you can do in that situation is jack the truck up. Now, with all the difficulties we had on the weekend, the one thing we were able to finally successfully do was resolve our shift linkage issue. And I'll show you some footage here, but what we found was the shift linkage, whether it's been worn out over time or something's been replaced or I don't know what, but what we found was the actual linkage was just long enough to get into park, in the park detent, but a hair too long to where it was actually hitting on a brake booster bolt. And it wasn't allowing it every single time to fully engage into park. Okay, so we're looking down here at the shift linkage, and you can see the brake booster bolt there, and that rod moved down. Dad's moving the gear selector. So bring that up into park, Dad, and you can hear that thunk, and that's the shift rod actually hitting the back of the brake booster bolt. So what I think happened, I think this shifter has either the linkage is stretched over time, the rod's bent or something, or this shifter, the adjustment on the column has slipped a little bit, and now it's trying to pull that rod up into park. That's park, right? You're trying to pull that into, and it's just borderline, like it's just able to just grab park, I think, is the issue. So we're gonna have to trim that rod down and then make the adjustment on the shift lever to where we can actually find park in the park detent and not grab reverse at all. So that is obviously a problem, because the last time we were out here, we were able to get it into park for most of the day. Then by the end of the day, we couldn't find park at all. So there's definitely an issue there. We're gonna have to resolve that. So I'm gonna take that linkage apart and see what we can do. And so what was happening was when the truck would vibrate, it would click it down into reverse, even when you were in the park detent. So the shift linkage was off, it was too long, and it was physically blocking it from fully engaging in park every single time the truck went into park. You could occasionally get it there, and it would stay there, but it was not consistent every time. We did a bunch of testing on it because we didn't want that to happen to us again when we go to work on this truck again. So after all that diagnosis, what we ended up doing was taking the whole linkage out of the truck, cleaning it all up. I wanted to try and put some bushings or something in it, but there's really no factory bushings in it. It's all just metal on metal parts. They're 50 years old, they're worn out. So the best resolution we could come to was to trim the upper linkage down so it no longer was anywhere near. We got more than 3/4 of an inch. It's closer to like an inch of clearance between the brake booster bolt and the top of the linkage. And we cleaned all that up, and then we adjusted the linkage. What we did was we put the transmission in park, and we reassembled the linkage, and we got it to a happy place, and then we tightened the linkage down, and then we made sure we could run through all the gears, reversed all the way down to first gear. It seems like we've got that resolved. Obviously, we don't have the truck running again yet, and we're going to keep the truck on jack stands until we know with 100% certainty that the truck is safe and there's no way that it can jump itself out of park anymore. So I thought it was important to address that. Of course, you know, I'm putting that out there on the internet. That's one of the things that was a little frustrating to me is I put my mistake out there. One, it was crazy footage, right? Like, how am I not going to release that? But there were a handful of people thought it was fake. Why did I have multiple cameras angles? Fine, whatever. I set up multiple camera angles when I film a video like that. So, and honestly, the second angle was set up for my audio, because if I have my camera under the hood on, this is really technical, but if I have my microphone collecting my audio, the engine noise will blow the sound out in that clip. So I actually had a remote mic set up on the side camera recording video and audio, so then I can overlay those videos and I can use the audio from one clip and just flip back and forth between the frames. As a little inside baseball on YouTube videos, the way I do my YouTube videos, but I often have two cameras set up. It's boring to have one angle. You're not going to sit and watch the same angle for 45 minutes. So that's why I had two camera angles up. Thought I should address that. A lot of people said chalk the wheels. Yes, I've addressed that. Some people just thought I was flat out lying that I left it in reverse, which I don't understand. I get that I had mentioned the neutral safety switch and that, yes, you can wire around that. But I think my point was there's people that said this truck had no neutral safety switch. It does. And yes, it was bypassed with the remote starter. But that wasn't the, like, ultimately, it doesn't matter because it happened. But that wasn't the problem anyways. Like, the truck was in park and jumped into reverse. And, you know, a lot of people saying, oh, you can, you know, obviously you can tell that it was in reverse when you started it. If you watch the clip, you can hear the idle, and you can actually hear it drop into reverse. You can hear the idle drop. And somebody said, oh, well, it takes the pump, the automatic pump, it takes the torque converter so long to pump up. blah, 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 blah. The truck was in park. It was in park 5 minutes before that when we started it. No one even entered the cab between the time that we started it then and the time that I started it in that clip. So I'm comfortable knowing what happened, but the only reason I mention all this is because I had a false sense of security thinking it was in park and it was in a safe position. And it was in park, but it still wasn't a safe situation. So that's the lesson that I think I would want people to learn. Not like, oh, just don't be an idiot and put it in park. It was in park. So if the lesson you take away from that is make sure it's in park, well, yes, you should do that. But the real lesson is don't assume that a vehicle that you haven't worked on is in a safe operating condition, especially if it's like one of the first few times you've actually started and run it. Like we had a will it run video on that, but I think what gets lost is we literally drove the truck that day home and parked it and it sat, and that was it. We didn't touch it for over a month. So honestly, one of our biggest mistakes was when we did that will it run video, I made the comment like, oh, this thing doesn't want to stay in park.
She does not want to stay in park. There's got to be an adjustment there.
It happened to us. I would say of all the times we put it in park, it was really intermittent. It wasn't all the time. And I think because it wasn't a continuous issue, it slipped both mine and my dad's mind when it came time to work on the truck. And that was a huge, huge mistake. Like we should have known, we should have thought about it. But in the moment, we were filming this video, we had all these ideas going, we're trying to get all this stuff done, and we didn't even think about it. Huge mistake. That was our number one mistake. So lessons learned, obviously, and it was the absolute best possible outcome for what happened. Some people thought it was fake. Like, I would never put anyone else in danger. And you guys saw, like, we were fortunate that we had a runway there, that no vehicles were parked. Because I'll be honest, like 9 times out of 10, there's a vehicle parked right behind the garage door there. I would never put my dad's property in danger of being damaged. Like, I just wouldn't. There were some good funny comments in there too. You know, someday I'll make a mean tweets thing or something, and I'll put that up because I thought it was pretty funny. The one thing putting a video like that up does is it hardens you a little bit to the YouTube comments, and that's fine. You know, some people are miserable and they're not going to be happy unless they try to make you miserable. So my philosophy is, you know, if you let their comments affect you, you're giving them exactly what they want. So it's not worth it. Feel free to be a hater and make those comments. I probably just am not going to interact with them. But I think that's the most healthy way to treat those. Overall, really good response to the video. It was a crazy situation. I acknowledge that. And I think it was just, you know, how could I not show you guys that? That was like a huge mistake I made, and I'm not going to not show you. So I think that's the thing. You know, if anyone who watches my videos regularly knows I don't fake anything. I don't do fake drama. I don't do any of that stuff in my videos. That was real. That was as real drama as it gets. So I thought I should address that. So why am I talking about all the things that went wrong? And why am I sitting in front of you, not out in the garage? Well, for one, we burned a whole day with all these issues. And in my head at the time, like, I've got no content, I have nothing filmed. And the other issue is, as we were working on the truck, I could feel myself getting like physically sick. Not sick from the situation, but scratchy throat, started to get a fever. And for the last 3 or 4 days, I've been really under the weather. Normally, if I don't get a video on Sunday, I'm going to go out to the shop Tuesday or Wednesday, film something for you guys, and kick out a video by Friday. This is like maybe 24 hours before this video releases. I'm filming this because I made a promise to myself that I was going to give you guys a video every single week. And this is video number 52, which means that's 1 year of me meeting my goal. And I think it's important that you set goals for these types of things and that you do your best to try and maintain them. So while this video may not be as entertaining for the rod masses, I think for you guys that watch me regularly, weekly, you'll kind of understand why I wanted to put this out and why I wanted to talk about this stuff. Setting goals is important, and you can get really unmotivated get to the point where you're so angry at your project, you don't even want to look at it and you walk away from it, and it might sit in your garage or your shop for a month, and a month might turn into 3, and 3 might turn into 6, and 6 might have turned into a year, and that might have turned into 5 years, and the next thing you know, you've wasted years actively avoiding this project when you could have jumped right back up on the horse, learned from your mistakes, and knocked the project out. I think that's the important lesson to learn. I let my frustration and anger get in the way of maybe a valuable lesson in that moment, and so I'm kind of here trying to rectify that now. We're not going to give up on that truck. We're going to go back. We're going to assess what we need. We're going to do our due diligence. Try and next time we're out there, make sure we have the right parts. And if we don't, that's okay. It is frustrating when you're not doing this full time and you only have a limited amount of time every week to work. But that's even makes it all the more important to not avoid your projects. So I think it's important that I share that this happens to everybody. So when it happens to you, you don't feel like, especially if you're just new to learning this stuff, you don't get discouraged and think, I don't know what I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing this. There's a lot of us that don't know what we're doing. I'd say a lot of times professionals, it's not that they don't know what they're doing, but they make mistakes and you don't see that. And that's one of the other things that I find really frustrating about a lot of YouTube content, a lot of automotive content, not everybody, but what you see is a nicely packaged 45 minutes to an hour of somebody taking their project from A to Z. And you don't really see the nitty-gritty details, and you don't see all the labor and all the mistakes and all the things that had to be fixed and all the times the wrong parts were ordered. You don't see all that stuff. I want to share that stuff with you guys because I want this content to be real and relatable. And what's relatable is when the parts don't fit and you can't get things apart and, everything goes wrong, and a day that was supposed to be productive turns into 3 days of cussing and swearing and beating on brake drums until things come apart. That is what working on cars is about most of the time. So I promise that moving forward, when those things happen, I'll try and keep my cool. I'll try and make sure I capture that footage and I can share it with you rather than be sitting here in my office and having you guys watch me behind a desk. So that's really what this week's video is all about. Making sure you stay motivated on your projects, making sure that you're out in your garage, you're working on them. We talk about it every single week. Some of you guys have been with me since day one, and I appreciate you guys so, so much. Some of you guys are just finding me, and I appreciate you guys just as much. I hope you're getting enjoyment out of these videos. I hope you're learning from them. I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to keep trying to bring you better and better content, better edited videos, more content varying across different vehicles. I'm going to do the best I can to do all that for you guys next year. And that's pretty much going to be it for this week, guys. So you know what that means. If you don't work on your project, it will not work on itself. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Builds.